on before we go. You okay?
Maybe I lose a tie?
No. I've been preparing for this meeting for 6 months. I've never seen you work harder on anything.
They give stuff like this to big companies. I work out of our garage.
Ben stuck his neck out for you because he's your You better. It's a distinct possibility.
Okay. Pandas. Daddy's gonna go make that bacon. You love soup? Okay. You know what? You're both right because, as always.
Thank you. It's so good to see you.
This'll get you in to see the nighttime panda feeding.
Wow.
And they needed somebody to check the math on their safety and security systems. Panic room, like 10 inches of military-grade super.
Wow. I mean...
It's a pleasure to finally meet you. 讲得非常好，还很流利，但是你的英文
It's their first visit to Hong Kong.
Very nice to meet you.
There's a shot in this movie where Dwayne Johnson, a man with a prosthetic left leg, climbs a construction crane towering over Hong Kong harbor and hurls himself through open air at a burning skyscraper. Not toward it, at it. You've probably seen that image. It's been everywhere. Memes, trailers, YouTube thumbnails. But here's the thing most people miss. That leap doesn't mean anything until you understand what it cost this man to get there. The crane jump is the spectacle. The prologue is the reason. And without the first 10 minutes of this film, the rest of it is just an expensive screensaver. So let's go back to the beginning. 2008, somewhere in suburban America. A quiet street. The kind of neighborhood where kids leave bikes on the lawn and nobody locks their doors. Normal houses, normal lawns, normal life, except for the one house at the end of the block that has an FBI perimeter around it and a situation developing behind closed windows that nobody in those other houses knows about. A man named Ray is inside holding his own family at gunpoint. There's a bomb strapped to his chest. Ray isn't a terrorist. That's the first thing the film wants you to understand. He's not ideologically motivated. He's not a calculated criminal running a scheme. He's a man who arrived at the absolute end of himself, the kind of end where the pain gets so loud it drowns out everything else, including whatever part of him loves the people he's threatening. That part is still there. His wife and children are still alive. That's actually evidence of it. But evidence doesn't make the situation less dangerous. The FBI's hostage rescue team has been called in because this is exactly what they handle. Not the standard negotiation scenarios that local law enforcement can manage. The full-scale, high-risk, federal-level situations where the wrong move ends multiple lives. And leading the team is Will Sawyer. He approaches the house with the kind of calm that's almost eerie to watch. Not fearlessness exactly, something more functional than that. The calm of a man who has learned to run toward chaos without letting it run into him. He reads the situation. He reads Ray. He finds the thread he thinks he can pull. His colleague Ben Gillespie is with him. At this point in the story, Ben is just that, a trusted partner. They move in sync. There's shorthand between them, the kind you only build after years of doing something dangerous together. The negotiation begins, and then it goes wrong. The explosion tears through the house with a force that the movie doesn't dramatize with slow motion or swelling strings. It just happens. 1 second the frame is intact, the next, it isn't. The sound design does something brutal here. The initial blast is almost muffled, like the moment before your ears register the full scale of what occurred. Then the noise catches up. Glass, timber, shouts. Will regains something like consciousness and looks down. His left leg is gone below the knee. I always notice how quiet this moment is. No dramatic score swell. No close-up designed to make you flinch. The camera just holds on Will's face as he processes something that can't be fully processed in the time he has. Confusion, then recognition, then a stillness that's not peace. It's the body making a decision to survive before the mind has signed off on it. He's pulled out of the wreckage. He survives. But the version of Will Sawyer who walked toward that house doesn't. During his recovery, he meets Sarah. She's a former U.S. Navy surgeon, and the film establishes her competence early, not through speeches about how capable she is, but simply through the way she moves in a medical environment, the way she talks to patients like people rather than problems. She and Will connect during a period when he's having to rebuild, in every sense, who he is and what his life looks like. There's something about being completely stripped down, physically, professionally, psychologically, that makes the connections you form during that time feel different, more real, less polished. They fall in love, they build something together, and 10 years later, watching them with their kids, it's clear they built it well. 10 years later. The title card appears and the whole texture of the film shifts. Color, sound, scale. Hong Kong at night is genuinely one of the most visually overwhelming places on Earth. Towers of lit glass stacked against each other, the harbor reflecting everything back up from below, the hills rising behind Victoria Harbor like dark shapes cut out of the sky. The city has a density and an energy that the film uses effectively because it makes the Pearl feel like something that belongs here, even though nothing like it has ever existed. The Pearl rises above every other structure in the frame. 3,500 feet, 225 floors, tallest building in the world, not just in the film's universe, in anyone's imagination of what a building could be. The design is striking. The lower floors are already open, commercially active, buzzing with businesses and visitors, but the upper residential floors are sealed, waiting. Because before Zhao Longji can open the rest of his life's work to the world, he needs a final security certification. He needs Will Sawyer's signature. Will arrived in Hong Kong not as FBI, not as anything with a badge or a rank. He runs a private security consultancy now. He assesses buildings, the systems, the redundancies, the gaps between how safe something is designed to be and how safe it actually is. It's quieter work than what he used to do, less adrenaline. But he's good at it, and the referral from Ben Gillespie, his old partner, put him in the room where the biggest job of his career is waiting. Sarah is here too. Georgia and Henry are running around the 98th floor like they own it, because for a few more weeks, they basically do. No other residents yet, just the Sawyer family on floors that haven't been formally handed over to the public. Henry and Georgia are twins. That energy they have, that constant chaotic warmth, it fills every scene they're in. You understand immediately why Will would climb a burning building for them. The meeting with Zhao is cordial and impressive in equal measure. Zhao Longji isn't performing wealth. He's genuinely passionate about what he built. He walks Will through the Pearl systems with the enthusiasm of a man who has spent years watching this vision go from blueprints to reality. The fire suppression architecture, the triple redundant safety fail-safes, the environmental controls. Will listens, asks the right questions, takes his notes. He reports that the systems have passed his testing so far. One remaining item: he needs to inspect the off-site security center before he can finalize his assessment. OKK, Zhao's head of security, is at the table. So is Pierce, the insurance executive managing the underwriting on the whole project. Professional, measured, a little difficult to read. And there's Ben, 10 years older, a little grayer, but the same Ben, the same easy smile, the same way of making a room feel less tense. Will is clearly glad to see him. Whatever the distance of time and career change, this is still a man Will trusts. There's warmth in how they talk to each other, the natural shorthand of two people who've been through something significant together. Before Will and Ben head out to the off-site facility, Zhao stops them. He hands Will a tablet. not a standard device. This particular tablet carries full administrative access to every system in the Pearl, every door, every camera, the fire suppression network, the elevator controls, the air circulation, all of it, accessible through a single screen, from anywhere. In the right hands, it's a convenience, a management tool. In the wrong hands, the film doesn't spell it out, but you feel the weight of the thing the moment it passes from Zhao to Will. $6 billion of technology and the lives of every person in that building, distilled into something that fits in a jacket pocket. Will tucks it away. He and Ben walk out together. And that, the last quiet moment before everything goes wrong, is where part 1 ends. 3 things happen almost at the same time, and the movie cuts between them in a way that makes your stomach drop before you fully registered why. Will and Ben are walking away from the Pearl toward a private car waiting to take them to the off-site security facility. Evening. The streets around the base of the tower are busy. The lower commercial floors of the Pearl are already open and running. Restaurants and retail spaces doing their thing. Foot traffic moving through like any other Wednesday night in Hong Kong. Normal city energy. The kind of scene where nothing looks wrong because nothing has started to look wrong yet. Then a man bumps into Will. Pocket move. Fast, practiced, hands going straight for the jacket pocket where the tablet lives. Will catches it before the device disappears. There's a brief struggle, nothing cinematic, just messy street-level chaos, and then the man bolts. Will looks at Ben and says what any trained former federal agent would say, that wasn't random. Someone knew he was carrying the tablet and sent someone to take it. Ben's expression doesn't flicker. That's the detail. Right there in his face, or rather in the total absence of anything in his face. Ben heard exactly what Will said. That wasn't random, and his expression doesn't do what a normal person's expression does. No surprise, no flash of anger. No, who would even know you had that thing on you? Just neutral, controlled. The face of someone holding something steady behind the eyes. Will doesn't catch it, not yet, but you do. The attempted pickpocket failed, so the backup plan activates. Ben himself. He attacks without any preamble, no monologue, no dramatic pause, no moment where he explains himself and gives Will a chance to react. Ben moves first and he moves hard, because he spent the same career Will did learning how to take a person apart efficiently. Will is bigger, but Will is also blindsided. Not just physically, the betrayal itself is the weapon. His body knows how to fight. His brain is still trying to process the fact that the man he trusts more than anyone in this city is trying to put him on the ground and strip the tablet from his jacket. The fight is ugly, short. 2 men with real training and a history between them that makes every second of it worse than a clean fight between strangers would be. Will wins. Ben dies. Sit with that for a second, because the movie doesn't linger, but we should. Ben got Will this job. Ben was standing close enough to him on the night of the explosion 10 years ago to carry his own version of that memory. He was the warm reunion in an unfamiliar city, the reason Will is in Hong Kong at all, and now he's dead at Will's hands on a side street with the harbor lights behind them, and the tablet is still in Will's pocket, and Will has maybe 40 seconds before the world comes apart. Why did Ben do it? The movie answers that later. Money, leverage, both as long reach into the kind of people who can be bought. But right now, none of that context exists. Will just killed his closest friend, and he doesn't even know why. Up on the 96th floor of the Pearl, Basha's team is already inside. Cora's Basha doesn't operate like the theatrical movie villains who announce their plans to rooms full of people. He's Danish, quiet, precise, the kind of dangerous that doesn't need volume. His team carries canisters of water-reactive incendiary chemical. The Pearl's fire suppression system operates on water. Those 2 facts colliding on the 96th floor is not coincidence, not accident, not chaos. It's engineering. The chemical ignites on contact with the suppression spray. The fire doesn't start small and build, it erupts. Floor 96 becomes a wall of heat that the building's own firefighting architecture is now actively feeding. The fail-safes don't cascade gracefully, they collapse. Alarms trigger throughout the upper floors. Emergency lighting kicks in. And then the full scope of what's happening becomes clear. There's an impassable barrier of fire across the entire 96th floor, and everything above it is cut off from the ground. Sarah is up there with Henry and Georgia. 129 floors of air and fire between them and the street. Will's still on the ground trying to get back to the building. He calls through to the Pearl. No answer from Okeki's security team. The emergency lines are jammed with incoming calls. He starts moving fast, tablet in hand, and that's when the second layer of the trap closes around him. What he has no way of knowing, what he can't see from street level, is that the moment Botha's team triggered the 96th floor fire, Shaw activated a cloned interface remotely. The Pearl's fire suppression systems above floor 95, disabled. Every automated safety protocol in the upper third of the building, offline. The ventilation system that should be cycling air away from the fire, reversed, pulling oxygen toward it like bellows. The tablet Will is carrying is now useless. The real control was always in Botha's pocket. Zhao's security chief, Okeki, responds the only way he knows how. He sends a full response team through the 96th floor access point in fire gear. Trained, armed, equipped, they don't come back out. The secondary explosion that follows, triggered remotely, removes that option from the board permanently and sends a very clear message about what Botha is willing to do. Pierce, meanwhile, has been playing the role of cautious insurance executive long enough that nobody's watching his movements during the evacuation. He flows with the personnel being streamed out of the lower floors, not toward an exit but against the grain, moving toward people who've seen things, people who've been close enough to the security infrastructure to be a problem later. He handles it quickly, quietly, the kind of efficiency you only develop if this isn't your first time. Zhao makes it to his penthouse. Barely. The sealed residential level at the top of the Pearl locks down automatically when the fire protocols trigger. It was designed as an emergency refuge, the one place in the building that should be completely secure in any scenario. Right now, it's the safest room in the building. It's also the room Bosha needs him to come out of. That tension, Zhao locked in, Bosha needing him out, is going to matter later. On the street, Will is running, not toward safety, toward the building. His kids are up there. His wife is up there. There's one access point he can think of that bypasses the front entrance, which is now completely surrounded by Hong Kong fire services, emergency vehicles, and the first wave of police units. There's the brutal geometry of his situation. He killed a man tonight. The body of Ben Gillespie is on a side street 2 blocks behind him. The building he's running toward is on fire, and every authority on the island is already treating this as a criminal event. He has no badge, no federal credentials that carry any weight here, no partner to call who can vouch for him. And the footage from the Pearl's external cameras has already been transmitted to Inspector Wu. Not raw footage, edited footage, spliced with the precision of someone who prepared for exactly this contingency. It shows Will in the right place at the right time, carrying what looks, to any analyst without context, like incendiary equipment. His face is clear. His movements are deliberate. The timestamps are impeccable. Inspector Wu is sharp. His team is fast. Within 20 minutes of the first alarm, there's a name and a photograph circulating through every unit in his operation. Will Sawyer, American national, former U.S. federal agent, which explains the tactical knowledge. Last seen fleeing the scene. Suspect, arsonist, possible terrorism angle under investigation. Wu deploys his teams systematically, the way a good cop does. No wasted movement, perimeter established, civilian access to the Pearl locked down hard. He's not emotional about it. He has the evidence in front of him and he follows it. The problem is that the evidence was manufactured by people who are very good at manufacturing evidence. Will reaches the construction site adjacent to the Pearl's eastern face. Most of the workers are gone, evacuated when the alarm went up. Equipment is still running on automated timers, lights blazing, steel scaffolding cutting geometric shadows across the ground. The site has been active for months, part of a separate project that shares the same Hong Kong harbor frontage as the Pearl. And rising out of the center of it, towering above everything except the Pearl itself, is the construction crane. Will stops at the base. The calculation he's making is simple and awful. The crane arm extends over the gap between the construction site and the Pearl's exterior at approximately the 96th floor level. If he climbs the crane, gets to the end of the arm, and builds enough momentum, the gap between the tip of the crane and the building's surface is bridgeable, in theory, at speed, with nothing below him except a fall that nobody survives. You have to understand what Will Sawyer's body is at this point in the film. He's carrying a prosthetic leg, he's 40-something. He just killed his best friend in a street fight. He's out of breath, running, being hunted by people who think he lit that building on fire. And the plan he's looking at is to climb 200 feet of construction crane in the dark and jump at a burning skyscraper. The news helicopters are already circling above. Inspector Wu's units are maybe 30 seconds from the construction entrance gate. Will grabs the first rung of the ladder and starts climbing. Picture this from Wu's perspective. His units are closing on the construction site. He's got radio chatter from 4 different approach angles, thermal from a surveillance drone overhead, and a photograph of Will Sawyer burning a hole through every screen in his command vehicle. The gate gets breached in under 2 minutes as people sweep the ground level. No sign of the suspect. Then someone points up. The crane is about 260 feet tall, not a record breaker by construction standards, but standing at the base of it in the dark with harbor wind pushing at you from the west. 260 feet is not a number, it's an experience. The latticed steel framework that looks clean and geometric from street level becomes something more industrial up close. Rust at the joints, cable grease on every surface. The rungs of the access ladder vibrate slightly in the wind, a low metallic hum that you feel in your palms before you hear it. Will is already most of the way up when Wu's team reaches the base. He doesn't look down. That's not bravado. Looking down at this point is genuinely counterproductive, and he knows it. Every motion is deliberate. Rung to rung, weight shifting carefully because the left leg is prosthetic and the grip distribution is different than it would be on 2 biological limbs, is compensating in real time, adjusting his center of balance with the kind of automatic recalibration you only develop after years of retraining your body to work with its new reality. The news helicopters find him first. Hong Kong's 24-hour media infrastructure means there are birds in the air within 12 minutes of a major fire alarm going up on the waterfront. By the time Will reaches the top of the crane's mast and starts moving along the horizontal jib arm, at least 2 cameras are rolling live footage of a man in civilian clothes moving across a construction crane in the dark above a burning skyscraper. Twitter doesn't know what to do with this. Neither does Inspector Wu. The jib arm extends out over the gap between the construction site and the Pearl's exterior. Out here, at height, the wind isn't the polite harbor breeze from the ground, it moves with actual intention. The jib sways in it, not dramatically. Not the swinging chaos of a disaster movie. A slow, rhythmic arc that you'd barely notice from the street, but that registers in every muscle you're using to stay on the arm. Will doesn't rush this part. He moves carefully along the jib, hand over hand where the geometry requires it, his eyes locked on the Pearl's exterior face. The fire is visible from here. You can see the glow from the 96th floor pressing up through the windows, the color of it shifting between amber and white depending on what's burning. Above the fire line, the building is dark. Emergency lighting here and there, a pale blue-green, but mostly dark. The residential floors where his family is. The floors he needs to reach. The gap between the end of the crane arm and the Pearl's surface is not small. I won't give you an exact measurement because the movie doesn't give you one, and guessing would be doing us both a disservice. What it gives you instead is context. The crane jib was built to reach toward the Pearl during construction, to transfer materials. It comes close, but close isn't the same as closed, and Will is not carrying equipment designed to bridge the difference. He's going to have to generate the momentum himself, count the seconds before he goes. He's standing at the end of the arm. Wind, height, fire below, the Pearl's glass face 2 stories worth of open air away, his family somewhere in the dark above him, the police below him. News cameras filming him live in front of however many 100,000 people are awake in Hong Kong at this hour. He runs the length of the jib. This is the shot. If you've seen any promotional material for this film, any poster, any thumbnail, any meme comparing it to a Die Hard sequel, you've seen a version of this shot. Dwayne Johnson, silhouetted against the glow of a burning building, arms extended, caught between the crane and the glass in the open air. What the promotional material doesn't communicate is how committed it looks. Leaping toward a building isn't like a standing jump. There's no ground beneath you correcting your trajectory. The physics of it, the angle of entry, the speed required to carry across the gap, the fact that you need to make contact with the building face at a point where something will give before your body does. It's a problem set, and Will has run the numbers in his head in the 3 seconds before he stopped thinking and started moving. He hits the Pearl. Glass. Steel frame. A window in the fire escape corridor of the upper residential section that was already compromised by heat expansion, already stressed, already ready to go. Will goes through it in an explosion of glass and frame and sheer force and lands hard inside on a floor that is dark and thick with smoke and probably 1,200 feet above the street. He gets up. Of course he gets up. The floor he's landed on is silent in the way burning buildings are silent when you're above, where the fire actually is. Not peaceful silence, but pressure silence, the kind that means the oxygen in the air around you is already being consumed by something below. Smoke moves through the ventilation shafts with a low, continuous sound like breath. Emergency lights cast everything in that pale institutional green that makes faces look wrong. He takes a second. One breath. Inventory. Cuts from the glass. Manageable. Nothing structural. The prosthetic is intact. He's inside. He's alive. He's above the fire barrier at floor 96, which means he's exactly where he needed to be, and also in a building that is actively trying to kill everyone in it. The residential floors of the Pearl are designed around a central atrium with branching corridors radiating outward. It's a striking architectural concept at the unveiling ceremony. In an active emergency with smoke-reducing visibility to 15 feet and the emergency map displays going in and out, it's a maze. Will knows the layout because he spent 2 weeks learning it before signing off on the security assessment. Floor plans, access routes, the emergency stairwell positions relative to each unit clusters. He memorized it as professional due diligence, the same way he used to memorize building layouts before going in on a HRT operation. He didn't memorize it thinking he'd ever need to use it like this. The first floor is clear. He moves fast, checking intersections, calling out, "Nothing! Up the stairwell to the next level." Smoke thicker here. Not catastrophic yet, but the direction of it tells him which way the ventilation is pulling. He covers his face, keeps moving. You want to know the cruel part of this sequence? The Pearl is enormous. Not big hotel, enormous, genuinely vast. The residential section alone spans floors 96 through 220, with each floor carrying multiple units, communal areas, private elevator banks, gardens, spaces that were designed to be a vertical city. Right now, every one of those floors between Will and his family is an obstacle course of smoke, darkness, debris from the initial explosion damage, and both as men, who are still in the building, still armed, and who know Will is here because the news footage from the crane jump played on every screen in the world, including, almost certainly, whatever comm system Botha's team is running. Will rounds a corner and finds the first one. Short fight. Not as short as Will would want because his body is already running on fumes and the smoke isn't helping his cardiovascular situation. But trained, purposeful, and over before it escalates. He takes the man's radio. Static, then voices. Czech or Slovak, he can't be certain, but not English, not Cantonese. Both us people. He keeps the radio. Information is a resource. Up another floor. The air is marginally better here, the drift of the ventilation pulling the worst of the smoke toward the east face. He moves toward the Sawyer family unit, floor 98, where Sarah and the kids have been staying. The door is open, not broken open, just open, which means someone left in a hurry. Or someone is inside waiting, or his family moved. They heard the alarms. They're not sitting on the couch waiting for rescue. Sarah has too much operational sense for that. She would have moved them, gotten to a more defensible position, somewhere with an external window for air, somewhere she could assess the ground situation. He steps inside anyway. George's drawing is still on the table by the window. Crayons and a half-finished picture of something that might be a dragon or might be a dog. It's genuinely hard to tell, and under different circumstances, Will would tease her about it. Henry's tablet is on the couch, a cartoon paused mid-frame. 40 minutes ago, this was just a hotel suite his family was living in temporarily. Now it's a crime scene inside a war zone, and his kids are somewhere in this building. He hears Henry before he sees him. A cough. Down the corridor toward the central atrium bridge that connects the north and south residential wings. Will moves toward it, hand on the wall, radio in his pocket still throwing static and foreign voices. He rounds the atrium corner and there they are. Sarah has Henry behind her, one arm back like she's physically holding him against the wall, and she's got a fire extinguisher raised because she heard Will coming and she does not take chances. She lowers it when she sees his face. Neither of them has time for the hug the moment deserves. "Georgia," Will says. And the look that crosses Sarah's face answers the question before she does. Georgia got separated. The initial chaos of the alarms and both his men moving through the floors. Georgia was in the corridor, Henry was in the unit, and by the time Sarah got them both moving, the smoke and the lockdown protocols that sealed certain emergency doors had cut the route between them. Georgia is smart! Resourceful. She knows the building rules and the emergency procedures. Will drilled into both kids when they first arrived. But she's alone somewhere above them, in a burning skyscraper, and her father just climbed a construction crane to get here. Will looks at the stairwell they came from, looks at Sarah. Henry is coughing into his sleeve, eyes wide, doing the thing kids do in genuine emergencies, which is follow the adult's energy. If the adults are controlled, the kid is controlled. If the adults fracture, the kid fractures. Will is controlled. We get Henry out first, he says. Not a conversation, a plan. Then I find Georgia. Sarah doesn't argue. That's the thing about two people who have spent a decade building a life together. The negotiation of who does what in a crisis doesn't happen out loud. It happened in every quiet decision they made over 10 years about who each of them is and what they're each capable of. Sarah knows Will is going back into that building. Will knows. Sarah will get Henry to safety and then make herself useful in whatever way she can from the outside. Trust isn't a feeling in this scene, it's a verb. The problem is getting Henry out. The fire barrier at floor 96 is still active. The crane route Will use to get in only works one direction. Every stairwell below the 96th floor is compromised or locked. The standard emergency elevator has been disabled by BOTA system override. There's one option, and it's not a good one. The emergency maintenance elevator, a freight shaft that runs parallel to the main elevator bank, designed for heavy equipment access and not for passenger use, has a manual override. If Will can get to the mechanical room, bypass the electronic lock, and run the elevator car down manually, it'll pass through the fire floor fast enough that the compartment won't ignite, in theory. You control the brakes from the bottom, Sarah says. She's already thinking the same thing. If you can get to the mechanical room from outside, I can. She looks at him. He looks like he was in a fight, then a crane climb, then a window impact, then another fight, in that order. You sure? She says, and Will gives her the smallest, most exhausted version of a smile. No, let's go. Georgia finds them first. That detail matters because the film had every opportunity to make the daughter a passive object to be rescued, a small scared face behind a door waiting for Dad. It doesn't do that. When Will and Sarah are moving toward the freight shaft access corridor, Georgia comes around the far corner of the atrium at a low run, one sleeve pulled up over her face, moving with the particular purposeful urgency of a kid who was raised by a former FBI agent and a Navy surgeon and absorbed more practical crisis instinct than most adults ever develop. She stops when she sees Will. He crosses the distance in about 4 steps. The hug is brief. This is not the moment for the long version, but it's real, and Henry comes in from behind Sarah, and for about 4 seconds, the Sawyer family is just 4 people in a burning building holding each other. Then Will pulls back, checks Georgia's face, checks her hands. You hurt? She shakes her head. There's a cut above her eyebrow from something, glass or debris, shallow, not serious. She's been crying recently, the kind that stops when something more urgent than grief presents itself. I followed the emergency map, she says, the ones on the walls. Will nods. Of course she did. The freight shaft access is 2 corridors east of the central atrium, behind a maintenance door that requires a keycard Will doesn't have. He bypasses it in about 90 seconds using the tablet. Even though both his team disabled the fire suppression override, not every building function is compromised. The access control system for maintenance infrastructure is on a separate hardwired network. Small win. He takes it. The freight shaft itself is industrial. No carpeting, no ambient lighting, no design consideration whatsoever for human comfort. Bare concrete walls, steel cable housing, the mechanical skeleton of the building stripped of everything decorative. The elevator car is a platform cage, heavy gauge, rated for construction loads. It's currently sitting at floor 214, 2 levels below Zhao's penthouse. Will calls it down manually from the shaft panel. While it descends, he walks Sarah through the plan. The car will pass through the 96th floor fire barrier fast. The cage is steel. The exposure time at speed is seconds, not minutes. The car isn't sealed, which means smoke and heat will enter the compartment during transit, but the passage will be fast enough that it won't reach temperatures that cause direct harm. Probably. He doesn't say probably out loud. The manual brake mechanism is at the base of the shaft, he says. Ground floor, maintenance sublevel. I need to be there to receive you if the car hits the bottom of the shaft at full speed with no manual brake engagement. I know what happens, Sarah says. I'll be there. How? You're up here. 2 options, neither good. Option 1, Will rides the car down with them, which means he's in the cage during the fire transit, which means he can't be at the brake panel at the bottom of the shaft, which means the problem doesn't change. Option 2, Will finds another way down. He looks at the shaft, looks at the cable housing. Will. Sarah's voice has a very specific register. Not fear, not pleading, something more pragmatic than either of those things. The tone of someone who has worked in trauma medicine and understands risk calibration. Tell me there's a third option. He looks at her. She already knows there isn't. Georgia and Henry get into the cage. Sarah stands at the gate, and what passes between her and Will in that moment doesn't need dialogue. They've done the version of this conversation that matters. Not in the last 10 minutes, but over 10 years of building a life together in the aftermath of an explosion that took his leg and, for a while, nearly took everything else about who he was. All of that is in the look. The version of, "I love you," that doesn't have to be said because it's in every other sentence you've ever said to each other. She pulls the gate closed. Will hits the manual release on the shaft panel. The cage drops. He moves. Back through the maintenance door, through the atrium, to the stairwell that wraps the building's eastern face. The plan is straightforward in outline and brutal in execution. Down the stairwell as far as the smoke and heat allow, then find an alternate shaft route or maintenance ladder into the mechanical sublevel in time to hit that brake panel before the cage reaches the bottom. The smoke on floor 104 is the worst he's encountered yet. Black, low, the kind that sits at chest height and forces you into a crouch because the only breathable air is 18 inches off the floor. He moves through it on hands and knees, counting doors by touch, navigating by the floor plan he memorized weeks ago for a completely different purpose. Floor 103, 103, 103, 103, 120. The stairwell door at 100 is hot to the touch. Not latently warm, actively hot. The metal radiating like something close to it on the other side has been burning for a while. He goes around. There's a secondary access shaft for the building's mechanical systems. Smaller than the freight shaft, not designed for people. Definitely not designed for someone built like Will Sawyer. That runs parallel to the main structure between floors 98 and the sublevel. He gets into it anyway. Watch what happens in the next 60 seconds, because this is the sequence the movie earns through everything that came before it. Will is moving through a maintenance access shaft that is, generously, 18 inches wide. He's descending by feel and by memory, no light source beyond the faint orange glow of fire from somewhere below. His shoulders scrape both walls simultaneously. Every movement requires him to redistribute weight onto a prosthetic leg that was not designed for this kind of lateral pressure loading. At floor 97, the shaft wall on the left side is hot enough to blister exposed skin. He doesn't stop. He doesn't slow down meaningfully. At floor 96, there's a gap in the shaft wall. Not a door, not an access point, just structural damage from the initial explosion. A section of the internal wall buckled outward. Through it, the fire. Real fire, not the ambient glow of it from 2 floors up. The actual event on the 96th floor and the sound of it up close is not what most people expect. It's not crackling, not the romantic campfire version. It's a continuous, deep roar, a sound with physical mass that you feel in your chest and your back teeth. He keeps moving, sub-level. His feet hit the service platform at the base of the shaft, and he's out through the access panel and into the mechanical room in one continuous motion. And the brake panel is across the room, and the cable is moving. The cage is already in the shaft above him and descending at speed. He crosses the mechanical room, gets to the panel. The cable tension gauge is spiking. The cage is coming fast. 94th floor equivalent, 93rd, 92nd. Will engages the manual brake. The resistance is physical. The brake mechanism is a lever system designed to be operated by maintenance crews with proper equipment and no particular time pressure. He's doing it by hand, with his body weight, in the dark, while the cable screams in its housing above him. The cage decelerates, not smoothly. It shudders, the whole shaft vibrating, but it decelerates. By the time it clears floor 96, it's moving at a speed that's survivable. The fire transit takes 4 seconds. The smoke that enters the compartment during those 4 seconds is enough to make Henry cough hard enough to double over. The cage hits the bottom level with an impact that's still heavy, but not catastrophic. Will gets the gate open. Sarah comes out first, Henry under her arm, already checking him over the way she checks all patients. Systematic, eyes moving, hands following. Georgia is right behind them, and she walks out of that cage and into the sub-level mechanical room with the bearing of someone who is going to process what just happened later when there's time for it. "You're okay," Will says. "It's not a question. It's the only sentence that fits." The ground floor evacuation route from the mechanical sublevel opens into the Pearl's service entrance on the building's northern face, away from the main fire response perimeter. Wu's units have the front and eastern approaches locked down, but the service entrance is a 30-second sprint through an access corridor that comes out into a loading bay. Sarah doesn't sprint. She moves fast with purpose. Different thing. Henry and Georgia each by a hand. Wu's people find them within 2 minutes of them clearing the building. Inspector Wu is a good cop. That's established in how quickly his entire operational picture shifts the moment Sarah Sawyer is in front of him. He's been working off manufactured evidence for the past 40 minutes, a clean, credible case that pointed directly at Will. But Sarah spent 20 years practicing the kind of precision communication that emergency medicine demands. She doesn't tell Wu everything. She tells him the right things, in the right order, the way you present information to someone whose understanding of the situation needs to change fast. Botha's name, the nature of the fire, the tablet. Ben Gillespie, dead by Will's hand, yes, but only after Ben initiated the attack. Pierce, the inside man, the second layer of the operation. Wu listens. He asks 2 questions, both good questions. Then he gets on his radio and his entire framing of the situation rotates. He's not hunting Will Sawyer anymore. He's trying to figure out how to work with him. Back inside the Pearl, Will is alone. Henry is out. Sarah is out. Georgia is out. Most people, at this point, with the family they climbed a construction crane for safely on the ground, most people find a way out. Not a heroic way out, just a way out. The building is still burning. Botha's men are still armed and moving. The fire suppression above floor 95 is still offline. But Zhao is still locked in his penthouse at floor 220. And Georgia is... Wait, Georgia got out. Georgia is safe. So why is Will still in the building? Because the tablet is still active. Because Botha still has control of every system above floor 95. Because the ventilation is still reversed, which means the fire is still being fed oxygen it shouldn't have access to. Which means the Pearl isn't going to stop burning until someone physically gets to the building management system in Zhao's penthouse and reboots it. And because Will Sawyer is the kind of man who, when he sees a problem that other people can't fix from outside, goes back in. He finds a stairwell that's still clear above the 97th floor. He starts climbing. 123 floors above him, Zhao is locked behind blast-proof glass, with everything Will needs and nowhere to go. 123 floors above him, Bosha is waiting. Will has no radio that works on Bosha's frequency anymore, no weapon beyond what he can improvise, no backup, he climbs anyway. Out of nowhere, the radio crackles. Will is on floor 112, climbing when the voice comes through, not on Bosha's encrypted channel, not in the foreign language of the guards he's been avoiding. Lean English, calm, the particular calm of someone who doesn't need to perform menace because they've already positioned themselves beyond the point where your emotional response to them matters. Botha, he has Georgia. Replay that for a second because the mechanics of how this happened are worth understanding. Sarah and Henry got out. They cleared the service entrance. They reached Wu's perimeter. They're accounted for. But Georgia came out of the Pearl running, and Shaw was already outside waiting. Not guessing, not positioned on instinct, waiting, specifically, because Botha's operation accounts for family members as resources, the same way it accounts for building access points. Georgia is 12 years old and she moved through a burning building on her own initiative following the emergency wall maps and she made it all the way out. And then Shaya just took her. Quick, professional, gone before anyone in Wu's perimeter could process what was happening. Now Botha is on Will's radio with a simple trade. Bring Zhao Longji down from his penthouse, deliver him to Botha's position on floor 96, and Georgia comes back unharmed. That's it. No elaborate terms, no countdown timer delivered with theatrical relish. Just the exchange, stated plainly, with the confidence of someone who understands that a father who just climbed a construction crane and went back into a burning building after getting his family out will absolutely do whatever is asked of him when that family is once again the leverage. Will keeps climbing. He doesn't answer, he doesn't negotiate. He stores the information the way he stores everything in a crisis. Filed, not processed, because processing is a luxury that belongs to later. Floor 220, the penthouse. Zhao Longji's sealed residential level sits at the top of the Pearl like a crown that can't be reached from below. The lockdown protocol, the one that activated automatically when the fire alarms triggered, sealed every internal access point. The blast-proof doors that were designed to keep danger out are now keeping Zhao in, which is exactly what Botha's team intended. The internal stairwells terminate at floor 219. The private elevator bank is disabled. The only way into the penthouse without the correct override credentials, which Botha's stolen control interface has already neutralized, is from the outside. Will stands at the top of the accessible stairwell and looks at the building schematic on the tablet. The penthouse has windows, large ones, the kind that cost more per pane than most people's cars, designed to give Zhao an unobstructed view of Hong Kong Harbor from every angle of his private living space. Structurally reinforced, but they open, manually, from inside, for ventilation. If Will can reach the exterior of the building at floor 220, he can reach a window. The question is, how to get from where he is to floor 220's exterior face. Duct tape. That's the plan, not a metaphor, not shorthand for improvisation. Actual industrial duct tape from a maintenance closet on floor 118, the heavy-grade construction variety that Zhao's building crews used throughout the Pearl's fit-out phase and left behind in the service areas. Will takes as much as he can carry. The exterior access he needs is through a ventilation maintenance panel on the building's south face at floor 218, a panel designed for technicians with harnesses, safety cables, and proper equipment. Will has duct tape, a prosthetic leg, and the kind of focus that develops when something you love is being held at gunpoint 200 floors below you. He gets the panel open. Nobody prepares you for what open air feels like at 2,000 feet, standing, inside a building, aware of height. That's a manageable cognitive event. The brain processes the number, runs a quick threat assessment, and settles into a kind of abstract vertigo that most people manage by not looking down, stepping out onto the exterior face of the building, with nothing between you and the ground except the structural glass and steel you're now hanging from. That's a different sensory register entirely. The wind doesn't push, it pulls in every direction at once, the way turbulent air at elevation moves around an obstacle. The city below is an abstraction at this distance. Lights and geometry, the harbor a dark shape bordered by more lights. The news helicopters are still circling below him. From up here they look like slow insects. Will wraps the duct tape around his hands and the exterior window track system. The industrial framework that the building's window cleaning equipment runs along, structural enough to hold load, and he moves. Laterally at first, along the south, face toward the corner that wraps to the penthouse windows. Then up, using the window tracks as a ladder, the duct tape gripping the steel frame with enough friction to hold his weight as long as he keeps moving with deliberate pressure and doesn't slip. The prosthetic leg is simultaneously the biggest problem and the least of his concerns. It can't grip the way a biological foot grips. There's no proprioceptive feedback, no micro-adjustment in real time. Every placement has to be intentional and fully committed before he transfers weight. It takes longer. It requires more upper body load while he positions the left leg. He doesn't slow down, one placement at a time, one frame at a time. The gap between floor 218 and floor 220 is 2 floors of exterior face, maybe 40 feet of vertical distance, in open air at midnight over Hong Kong Harbor. He makes it in less than 3 minutes. The penthouse window opens from inside. Will taps on the glass. Zhao Longji stares at him from the other side of it for a long moment, a man he hired to assess the security of his building, now hanging from the exterior of that building 2,000 feet in the air with duct tape on his hands, asking to be let in. Zhao opens the window. Will climbs through. The penthouse is everything. The rest of the Pearl's upper floors aren't. Quiet, intact. A space that communicates exactly what Zhao Longji wanted it to communicate about who he is. Art on the walls, clean lines, a full-length harbor view that, under any other circumstances, would stop conversation for a full 30 seconds. Right now it's just the backdrop to 2 men who need each other and aren't yet sure how much the other one can be trusted. Zhao opens with the obvious. How did you get up here? Tape, Will says. A pause. Zhao looks at his hands, looks back at Will's face, files it. Basha doesn't raise his voice in the conversation that follows. Zhao tells Will everything in the measured tone of a man who has been sitting alone in a locked penthouse watching his building burn for the past hour and a half, and has had exactly enough time to decide that the version of himself who tried to manage this quietly is done. Here's what happened, stripped down. During construction of the Pearl, Kores Bautha approached Zhao through intermediaries. The ask wasn't a one-time payment. It was sustained extortion, structured around a threat that the construction workforce would be systematically targeted if Zhao didn't comply. not killed. Maimed, disappeared, made unreachable. The kind of pressure that doesn't leave obvious evidence but destroys a project timeline in ways that bankrupt it. Zhao's entire net worth was wrapped up in the pearl. He paid. He paid every time. But Zhao is also a man who spent his career building things designed to last, and he understood that an extortion arrangement with a criminal syndicate of Bota's scale was not something you survive by being the only person without documentation. So he kept records, meticulous ones, every payment, every intermediary contact, every account number the money moved through. 3 separate crime organizations, not just Botha's operation, but the networks Botha himself answers to, the larger architecture of organized crime that funded the extortion scheme and expected a return. That documentation is on a hard drive in this penthouse. Botha needs it destroyed, not just to protect himself, to protect the 3 criminal organizations whose financial infrastructure is detailed on it. The pearl burning is the cover operation. The real objective has always been getting into this room, getting Zhao out of it, and wiping the drive before anyone with a law enforcement mandate can access what's on it. Will looks at the drive, looks at Zhao. That's why he needs you out of this room, he says. You're the only one who knows the full access sequence. Zhao nods. If I'm dead or gone, the drive self-destructs. It's a fail-safe I built in. The moment my biometric confirmation stops registering for more than 4 hours. How long have you been in here? Zhao checks the time. Neither of them says anything for a moment. 3 hours and 40 minutes. 20 minutes to automatic destruction of the only material evidence linking Botha's extortion network to the 3 organizations behind it. Will does the math fast. Botha is on floor 96 with Georgia and a deadline of his own. He needs Zhao delivered before he loses whatever operational window his exit plan requires. Zhao needs to keep the drive intact long enough to get it to Wu's team, which means he can't just disappear into the building without Bosha assuming the worst and disappearing with Georgia. The only play is forward. I need to deliver you to Bosha, Will says. Zhao's expression doesn't change. That's your plan. Part of it. And the rest? Will looks around the penthouse. The layout, the access points, the geography of what's above them, 1 more floor, the observation deck at floor 221, the roof architecture of the Pearl, the mirror room. Zhao mentioned it during their first meeting weeks ago. The crowning design feature of the Pearl's observation experience, the room at the top that creates infinite reflections in every direction, an art installation masquerading as architecture. He asks about it now. Zhao explains, every wall, floor, and ceiling mirrored, tunnels that can be rotated remotely, changing the reflection geometry in real time, designed to disorient intentionally, to create the feeling of infinite space in a finite room. It's controlled from a panel outside the room's main entrance. Will nods slowly. An enclosed space where nothing looks like what it is, and the visual information you rely on to track movement and distance becomes completely unreliable. Against a man like Bosha. All right, Will says, I'm gonna make you a deal. Zhao waits. You walk with me down to floor 96. You stand in front of Bosha. You give him whatever he asks for in the first 60 seconds. And then, when I move, you trust me completely and do exactly what I say. Zhao considers this. Outside the penthouse window, Hong Kong Harbor glitters 45 stories below the top of the world's tallest burning building. Why would I trust you? Zhao says. You've been inside my building for 2 hours destroying things. Fair. Because your building is on fire, Will says, and I'm still in it. Zhao looks at him for a long moment, then he picks up his jacket. Floor 96 hits different when you step off the stairwell. The fire here isn't the raging wall it was at ignition. It's settled into something more deliberate, hotter in specific points, the chemical reaction that started it, having burned through its initial fuel source and now feeding on the building's structural materials instead. The smoke is stratified, gray near the ceiling, black lower down where the heavier particulates are sinking. Emergency lighting throws everything in amber. The floor plan Will memorized weeks ago is still accurate, but the spatial experience of it is completely transformed. Walls you'd walk past without a second thought in normal conditions are now radiating enough heat to be tactile from 4 feet away. He leads Zhao through it. Not because Zhao couldn't navigate it himself. The man built this building. He knows the floor plan better than anyone alive. Will leads because Will knows which routes Bocha's team is using and which ones they've abandoned, based on radio traffic and the positions of the bodies he's passed in the last 2 hours. The route through the Eastern Maintenance Corridor is clear. The central atrium approach is not. Zhao follows without complaint. Botha is waiting in the main atrium of the 96th floor, and his composure is the most unsettling thing about him. Most people, after 2 hours inside an operation this complex, with this many moving pieces, with the whole thing being broadcast live on every news network in Southeast Asia, most people show something. Stress has a physical vocabulary. Botha doesn't speak it. He's standing in the center of the atrium with 2 of his remaining men flanking him and Georgia in front of him, one of Zha's colleagues holding her arm, and he looks like a man who arrived early for a meeting and has been waiting patiently ever since. Georgia's eyes find Will the moment he steps through the door. She doesn't call out, doesn't move. She reads the room the way a kid raised by the people she was raised by reads a room, takes in Botha, takes in the men, takes in her father's expression, and makes the correct calculation that the version of this that ends well is the one where she stays still and lets the adults execute whatever plan is already in motion. She's 12 years old. Will's chest does something complicated. He keeps his face neutral and walks Zhao to within 10 feet of Botha. The exchange is brief. Botha acknowledges Zhao with something close to professional respect, which lands strange given the circumstances, but reflects the reality of their history. These 2 men have been in a financial relationship for years. Botha extorted Zhao systematically, and Zhao paid systematically, and the transaction was always conducted at a distance, through intermediaries, without either of them ever being in the same room. Now they're face-to-face inside the building, that relationship built and burned, and the social register of it is genuinely bizarre. Botha says he needs Zhao's biometric confirmation to access and wipe the hard drive. Zhao says nothing. Botha says Georgia can leave the moment the drive is confirmed, wiped. He looks at Will when he says it, making it an offer, or the shape of one, the kind of offer that's really just a statement about who has leverage and who doesn't. Will agrees. This is where you have to pay attention, because the next 90 seconds move fast and the geography of it matters. Will agreed to the terms. Zhao stepped forward toward Botha. The hard drive, which Botha produced from a case one of his men was carrying, was placed on the atrium table for Zhao to authenticate. Georgia was moved toward Will as the first half of the exchange, and then Will's hand found the atrium's environment control panel on the column behind him. Not the fire suppression panel. That's been disabled since hour 1. The environment control panel, the one that governs ventilation routing, internal door sequencing, and on-the-floor specific subsystem that Zhao personally designed for every level of the Pearl, the access protocol for the observation deck elevator. He hit one button. The elevator at the far end of the atrium unlocked with a sound like a pressure seal releasing. Botha's head turned at the sound. 1 second, maybe 2, of divided attention. His eyes moving from Zhao to the elevator and back. Zhao grabbed the hard drive off the table and ran. What follows is not elegant. It's not the choreographed action sequence where everyone moves in slow motion and the punches land with perfect cinematic weight. It's fast and loud, and Botha's 2 remaining men respond immediately, and Will puts himself between them and Zhao. And for about 40 seconds, the 96th floor atrium is a contained explosion of close-quarters violence that Will is only surviving because his body has been doing this in some form or another since he was 22 years old. He takes hits. He gives more back. Georgia runs for the observation deck elevator that Will unlocked. Zhao is right behind her. One of Botha's men goes down. The second gets Will into the wall hard enough to crack the drywall, and Will uses the rebound to end the exchange. He gets to the elevator, gets in. Botha is crossing the atrium at a run. The first moment his composure has cracked in 2 hours, because the hard drive is in the elevator with Zhao, and if those doors close, they close. The elevator rises. Floor 221, the observation deck, the top of the Pearl. The mirror room doesn't look like a weapon. It looks like the crowning design achievement of a billionaire who understood that the best thing you can do with the highest vantage point in the world is make it feel infinite. Every surface, floor, ceiling, all 4 walls mirrored. Not flat mirrors in frames, but continuous reflective panels with no visible seams, curved at the joins to eliminate the visual interruption of a corner. Standing inside it is genuinely disorienting in a way that takes a moment to metabolize. There's no visual horizon, no spatial anchor, nothing to tell your vestibular system where the room ends and the reflection begins. Panels in the walls can rotate. Zhao controls them from a small panel near the entrance. He shows Will how quickly, hands moving with the familiarity of a man demonstrating something he designed. The room can be reconfigured in real time. Reflections everywhere, nothing in its actual position. Botha comes up through the access stairwell adjacent to the elevator. He didn't wait for the elevator to come back down, he ran the stairs. And he enters the observation deck with his weapon drawn and Georgia's arm back in his grip and Shah a step behind him, with that particular economy of movement that marks someone who is genuinely dangerous as opposed to someone who is merely armed. The mirror room door is open. Will and Zhao are inside. Basha pushes Georgia ahead of him through the door, and the room immediately does what it was designed to do. Nobody in the room moves for a moment. That's the effect of it. The first 2 or 3 seconds inside the mirror room, even with training, even with preparation, the brain spends a clock cycle trying to reconcile the visual information it's receiving. Botha is a professional. He adapts fast. But fast isn't the same as instant, and in the mirror room, instant is the only currency that matters. Zhao is at the wall panel. He rotates 3 mirror sections simultaneously. The room rearranges. The reflections multiply, shift, contradict each other. There are now 6 versions of Botha visible from where Will is standing, and none of them are the real one. And the real one is somewhere in the room with a loaded weapon and a hostage and not enough spatial information to be certain where anyone actually is. Botha looks at Will the way a surgeon looks at a problem, not with anger, not with fear, but with the focused attention of someone recalibrating a plan that has hit an unexpected variable. He knows what Zhao just did to the room. He adapts his grip on Georgia, pulling her closer, using her as a positional anchor because she's the one piece of information in this room he can verify through touch rather than sight. Will moves left. 4 of the Botha reflections move right because of the panel rotation. 1 of them moves left with him. Botha tracks the wrong one for a half second. That half second is the whole game. Georgia is a kid who followed emergency wall maps through a burning building alone. She's also been listening to everything in this room since the door opened, and when Will moves left and Botha's attention fragments across the reflections, she does something that is either brilliantly calculated or pure instinct, and it doesn't actually matter which. She drops her weight. Old dead weight, the way kids are uniquely capable of doing, every muscle releasing simultaneously. It's the one physical response to being grabbed that is almost impossible to maintain grip against because there's no frame to hold. A body that's decided to become a puddle of itself doesn't give you purchase. Botha's grip breaks. Georgia hits the floor and rolls toward the wall. Zhao kills the room's lighting from the entrance panel, plunges everything into darkness, and the mirrors go from a hall of infinite confusion to something worse. Infinite nothing, reflections of black on black, no light source to orient by. Will already knows where Botha is. He moves through the dark on the memory of Botha's last confirmed position. 3 steps forward, 1 right, and hits him solidly, and they go into the mirror wall together, and 1 panel shatters, and now the room has sharp edges in the dark along with everything else. The fight in the dark is brief. The grenade. Botha's last play, pulled from a vest pocket in the final second when the outcome was already clear, clears the railing of the observation deck before anyone can react to it fully. Botha goes with it, not thrown, not executed. The physics of the struggle at the observation deck railing, in the dark, with a live grenade in his hand that he couldn't throw cleanly, he goes over. The detonation happens below the observation deck level, and the shockwave rocks the floor under Will's feet and Georgia's feet and Zhao's feet, and then there's just the sound of the wind coming through the broken mirror panel and Hong Kong Harbor 45 stories below the top of the world's tallest building, visible now through the gap in the glass. Botha is gone. Will finds Georgia by sound. Her breathing, slightly too fast, controlled, and puts his hand on her shoulder and she grabs his arm with both hands and doesn't let go. Sarah is already moving when Shah clears the perimeter. Wu's team had the Pearl's Northern Service entrance locked down tight, vehicles staged, personnel covering every approach vector, the professional architecture of a well-run containment operation. Sarah and Henry cleared through it 20 minutes ago, accounted for, moved back behind the active line. Henry is wrapped in a thermal blanket on the step of a response vehicle, his face doing the thing faces do after sustained adrenaline, the careful blankness of someone who hasn't decided yet how they feel about the last 2 hours of their life. Sarah hasn't sat down once since they got out. She's been watching the building. Shia doesn't announce herself. She moves through the gap between 2 response vehicles with the specific silence of someone who has spent a career making herself invisible in crowds, not running, not hurrying, not doing anything that reads as wrong at a glance. She's carrying the tablet, not Botha's control interface, the original one, Will's tablet. The one that was taken from him in the street before any of this started and has been in Botha's operations possession since the first hour. With Botha dead at the base of the observation deck and the operation collapsing, Shah's objective has narrowed to one thing: destroy the tablet before its administrative access can be used against whatever remains of the network. Get it off the board. Walk away. She gets within 15 feet of a clear exit before Sarah steps in front of her. The fight is not a long one, and the movie treats it with the same matter-of-fact respect it gives every physical confrontation. No slow-motion beauty, no musical cue telling you how to feel about it. Two women with very different skill sets and very different reasons for being here, in the dark at the edge of a fire perimeter, deciding something quickly. Shah is trained for this. Professionally, extensively, the kind of training that comes from years of operational fieldwork rather than a gym. Sarah trained in combat medicine in active naval deployments, which means she spent years in environments where physical self-preservation was a baseline professional requirement, not a specialty. They're not evenly matched, and the movie doesn't pretend they are. Sia is better, but Sarah isn't trying to win a fight. She's trying to get the tablet. She takes hits she doesn't fully absorb, redirects rather than blocks, giving ground deliberately, drawing Shah's focus onto the fight itself and off the tablet. At the moment Shah commits to a finishing move, Sarah gets her hands on the device. She goes down with it, underneath Shah, and locks her grip. Wu's people reach them in the next 4 seconds. Shah is contained. Sarah is on the ground with a split lip and both hands on the tablet and the expression of someone who has been underestimated in a professional context before, and would like to briefly note, for the record, that she finds it exhausting. The tablet screen flickers once, then locks in. Wu stands over Sarah's shoulder as she works through the Pearl's administrative access, not hesitating, not requesting guidance, moving through the system architecture with the focused efficiency of someone who learned it from Will during the weeks they spent in Hong Kong before everything went wrong. He walked her through the key functions during the assessment process, partly because he trusted her with everything, partly because she asked the right questions and he knew she'd retain it. The fire suppression system above floor 95. Disabled by Botha's team at hour 1 of the operation. Every automated failsafe switched off, the ventilation reversed to feed the fire rather than starve it. The building has been burning upward for 2 hours on the oxygen its own systems have been providing. Sarah finds the master override, enters the authentication sequence. The Pearl systems take 4 seconds to process the command, 4 seconds that feel considerably longer from where Wu is standing, and then every fire suppression node above the 95th floor activates simultaneously. From the outside, it registers as a sound first, the deep mechanical exhalation of a building exhaling 2 hours of held breath, pressure equalizing, systems coming back online, the structural voice of a 225-floor building doing what it was designed to do. Then the visual, through the windows of the upper floors, the amber-orange glow that's been painting the Pearl's facade since the first hour begins to change. Dims, shifts, the white foam of suppression spray catching in the emergency lighting, floor by floor from the 96 up. Henry watches from the step of the response vehicle with his thermal blanket pulled tight. "Mom did that," he says. Wu's officer next to him doesn't have a response to that, but nods in a way that constitutes full agreement. The glow keeps dimming. By the 140th floor, the fire is fighting a losing battle against a building that has decided to put itself out. By the 80th, it's isolated pockets rather than continuous burn. By the 200th, only smoke. Wu's team reaches the observation deck by helicopter. The access via interior stairwell is still compromised below the 80th floor, but the aerial approach to the roof is clean now that the thermal columns from the worst of the fire have collapsed. The first helicopter touches down on the Pearl's roof pad, and the crew that comes off it finds 3 people waiting. Will Sawyer, still upright through mechanisms that are probably beyond normal physiological explanation at this point in the night. Zhao Longji, the hard drive in his jacket pocket, looking at his building through the broken mirror panel with an expression that contains about 7 different things simultaneously. Georgia Sawyer, still holding her father's arm with both hands. The roof extraction is fast. A second helicopter for Wu's team, a third standing by for Zhao at his own request. He wants to stay near the building. He wants to see the suppression complete. He has 2 hours of watching his life's work burn to reckon with, and he's going to do some of that reckoning from the air before he comes down. Nobody argues with him. Will's helicopter descends toward the northern perimeter. He sees the response vehicles, the thermal blanket, Henry standing up. He's off the helicopter before the skids fully settle. The reunion doesn't have a speech. This is one of the things the movie gets genuinely right. It understands that the moments people work toward in an action film don't actually arrive with orchestral swells and carefully chosen words. They arrive as physical fact. 4 people finding each other in a crowd of emergency personnel and closing the distance between themselves as fast as they're capable of moving. Sarah reaches Will first. Georgia is still connected to his arm. Henry crashes into all 3 of them from the side. For a moment, the Sawyer family is just a single entity in the middle of a fire scene, holding itself together. Wu watches from across the perimeter and has the professional grace to let it run for a while before he approaches. The aftermath moves quickly from there, the way real operational aftermath always does. There's never a pause for reflection when there are this many moving parts demanding immediate attention, both as remaining personnel are being processed. The hard drive is in Wu's custody within the hour, its contents representing the most significant documentation of organized crime financial infrastructure in Southeast Asia in a decade. Pierce is dead inside the building, which closes one thread. Shah is in custody. The Pearl is standing. Zhao Longji holds a brief, informal conversation with Will before the medical team separate them for assessment. He's not a man who expresses himself obliquely. He built a 3,500-foot building to communicate something about what he believed was possible. Subtlety was never the primary mode. He looks at the Pearl, then at Will. "I'll rebuild it," he says. "Better." Will looks up at the building, the smoke still clearing from the upper floors, the fire suppression having done its work, the structure itself sound because Zhao built it to be sound, regardless of what happened to it from the inside. Structurally, the Pearl survived. The interior damage is significant and the 96th floor will need to be completely rebuilt, but the bones of it are intact. "I know," Will says. That's the whole exchange. 2 sentences between 2 men who spent the last 2 hours depending on each other in a burning building. It's enough. So what do you actually make of Skyscraper? Critically, it landed soft. A 50% on Rotten Tomatoes, a general consensus of competent but disposable, comparisons to Die Hard that the movie was never going to win. Those comparisons are unfair in a specific way. Die Hard is a film about a reluctant, flawed, fundamentally ordinary man who wins through desperation and luck as much as skill. Skyscraper is deliberately something different. Will Sawyer isn't reluctant. He's a man who lost part of himself to a crisis and rebuilt his entire identity around protecting the people he loves, and the film is, underneath all the crane jumps and fire, a story about what that kind of love looks like when it's tested at maximum pressure. The thing the movie does better than it gets credit for, it never once makes Sarah a passenger in her own film. She gets the family out. She reads Wu and changes his operational picture in under 5 minutes. She fights Ya and wins through intelligence rather than physical dominance. She reboots the building, in a genre that routinely builds a wife character for the sole purpose of giving the hero something to fear losing. Skyscraper gives Neve Campbell a character who is doing her own version of the same job Will is doing, just from the other side of the glass. That's not a small thing. It's actually the film's most quietly radical choice. The crane jump will always be the image people remember, and fair enough. It's committed and ridiculous and exactly the kind of thing you go to a movie like this for. But the moment that actually earns the movie its runtime is quieter than that. It's Will, in a maintenance shaft on the 96th floor of a burning building, moving through heat and dark on his hands and knees toward a brake panel he has to reach before a cage full of his family hits the bottom of a shaft at terminal velocity. No cameras on him, no crowd, no one to acknowledge that what he's doing is extraordinary. He just does it. That's the version of heroism this movie is interested in. Not the performed kind, not the kind that gets witnessed, the kind that happens in the dark because the alternative is not happening. If you've been watching this from the start, thank you. Genuinely. These long-form breakdowns only work if you're actually with it. If you care about what happens to people in a building we all know isn't real. If the crane jump made your stomach drop a little even though you've probably already seen it. Drop a comment with the one moment that got you most. For me, it's Georgia, every time. The kid who followed the emergency maps alone, who dropped her weight at exactly the right second, who walked out of a cage through fire and immediately started processing it so she could be okay. 12 years old, like, come on. If this kind of breakdown is your thing, subscribe and hit the bell. There's a lot more of this coming, and the next one is a movie that makes Skyscraper look like a light afternoon. Until then, stay off burning buildings. The prosthetic leg is worth talking about properly because the movie uses it in a way that most films don't bother with. Action cinema has a long history of protagonists with physical damage that gets quietly forgotten the moment the plot needs them to do something physically demanding. A character limps in the second act and sprints in the third. A wound established early disappears when it's inconvenient. It's a contract the genre has made with its audience. The hero's body is a storytelling device, not a biological reality, and realism takes a back seat when the sequence demands it. Skyscraper doesn't do that. Will's prosthetic left leg is present in every physical sequence in the film, not as a symbol, not as a dramatic obstacle to be overcome with the power of determination, but as a factual component of how he moves through the world. When he climbs the crane, the weight distribution is different. When he navigates the maintenance shaft, the positioning has to be deliberate in ways it wouldn't be with two biological limbs. When he scales the exterior of the Pearl with duct tape, every left side placement is a committed choice rather than an instinctive one. Dwayne Johnson, who, it's worth noting, is an enormous human being who spent 2 decades building a physical presence that reads as near invincible on screen, plays all of this without leaning into it dramatically. Will doesn't grimace at strategic moments to remind you the leg is there. He doesn't have a quiet scene where he removes it and the camera lingers meaningfully. It's just part of how he moves, part of how he solves problems, part of who he is, the same way his FBI training is part of who he is, integrated, not performed. That choice is more interesting than it sounds. Back on that crane arm for a second, because the sequence deserves more than the 30 seconds of screen time it takes to describe the leap itself. The climb up the crane's mast is roughly 260 feet of vertical ladder in open air. For context, that's approximately the height of a 22-story building. Most people, asked to climb to the roof of a 22-story building on an exterior ladder with no safety harness, in the dark, with harbor wind pushing at them from the west. Most people would find that experience sufficiently challenging without anything else going on. Will is doing it while being hunted, while having recently killed someone he considered a brother, while knowing his family is in a burning building, and every second on the ladder is a second he isn't doing something about that. The Hong Kong geography does something for this sequence that a domestic American setting wouldn't. The city at night from altitude isn't empty. It's impossibly full, lights stacked against lights, the harbor a mirror below the neon, the residential towers of Kowloon visible across the water. There's a specific kind of loneliness that comes from being in desperate trouble in the middle of a densely populated city, surrounded by millions of people going about their lives who have no idea what's happening 40 feet above their heads. The crane sequence captures that. Wu's drone footage, transmitted live to the command vehicle, shows Will as a thermal signature on a cold steel structure, a small, bright shape moving upward through the frame, impossibly deliberate. Wu watches it for a moment before he gives the order to intercept at the base. His officers reach the crane ladder just as the thermal signature moves out of the mast and onto the horizontal arm. Nobody climbs after him. The crane arm at height is not a controlled environment where a tactical unit can operate effectively. Wu makes the pragmatic call: hold the base, watch the building, wait for whatever happens next. What happens next is the jump. Ask anyone who's seen this movie which image they carry out of the theater, and the answer is always the same. Arms out, silhouetted against fire, caught between the crane and the glass in a moment that shouldn't be physically possible and is definitely visually extraordinary. The marketing team knew exactly what they had. Every trailer, every poster, every social media graphic led with that image. What the marketing doesn't show is the landing. The landing is brutal in a way that's almost funny. Will goes through that compromised window not in a controlled dive, but in a collision, glass and frame coming apart around him, and he hits the corridor floor on the other side with the full kinetic force of someone who just crossed 20 feet of open air at speed. He rolls, he stops, he takes inventory. The sequence earns its spectacle because it doesn't cheat the aftermath. He doesn't land on his feet. He doesn't spring up immediately. He gets up in the way people who's been through things get up, with the body doing the work while the mind catches up, one function at a time. Then he moves. Rawson Marshall Thurber made a specific choice throughout this film to keep the physical consequences honest, even when the physical acts themselves are fantastical. Will gets hurt doing the things he does. He carries those hurts through the rest of the film. By the time he's on the roof waiting for the helicopter, the accumulated damage of the last 2 hours is visible on him in a way that reads as genuine, not dramatized for sympathy, just present as a fact. That's how you earn an action sequence, not by making it bigger, by making everything around it real enough that the audience believes in the person doing it. The maintenance shaft descent doesn't get its due. It's sandwiched between two sequences the film promotes more aggressively, the elevator plan that precedes it and the brake panel race that follows, and it functions mostly as a connective tissue scene, a way of getting Will from where he is to where he needs to be. Easy to gloss over. Easy to describe as, Will finds another way down in a summary and move on. But spend a moment actually in the shaft with him and the sequence is quietly one of the most effective in the film. 18 inches wide, built for cables and conduit, not people. Will is 6'5", approximately 260 pounds, and he gets into the shaft and descends it by feel in near complete darkness, while the wall to his left radiates heat from the fire on the 96th floor. The physical act of it, the compression, the weight redistribution onto a prosthetic leg in a space with no lateral room to adjust, is not something that communicates at full volume on screen, but it communicates. Johnson's performance in confined sequences like this is actually one of the underrated elements of the film. He plays confinement differently than he plays open space action. The bigness that reads as power in the crane sequence becomes a liability in the shaft, and he registers that shift without being asked to comment on it narratively. He just moves differently, more carefully, more slowly, and the fire is right there. The gap in the shaft wall at floor 96 is a production design choice that could easily have tipped into melodrama. The main character passing within arm's reach of the movie's central disaster threat is, on paper, an obvious dramatic device. What keeps it from feeling manufactured is the sound design. The fire at floor 96, heard through a structural gap from 18 inches away, sounds like nothing cinematic. It sounds industrial, mechanical, a continuous deep note that you feel as much as hear, the acoustic signature of sustained combustion at scale. There's no music in this sequence, just that sound, and Will moving through the dark past it. He doesn't pause to acknowledge it, doesn't look at it longer than necessary to assess whether the gap is a structural risk to the shaft. Files it, keeps moving. The brake panel sequence at the bottom of the shaft is pure mechanics, and the movie treats it that way. No score swell, no theatrical lighting, no close-up of Will's determined face. He comes out of the access panel into the mechanical room, identifies the brake lever, crosses the room, and engages it while the cable screams in the housing above him. What makes it work isn't the action, it's the math. The film has spent 40 minutes establishing exactly what the freight cage is, where it is, how fast it moves when released manually, and what happens if the brake isn't engaged before it reaches the bottom of the shaft. It laid that math out through dialogue between Will and Sarah, not as technical exposition, but as a conversation between two people who understand practical risk assessment and are communicating it to each other efficiently because that's how they talk. By the time Will's hands are on the lever and the cable is moving, the audience has all the numbers. They know what a miss means. They know the margin. The lever engages. The cage decelerates. There's a moment, very brief, maybe 2 seconds, where it's not clear if it's going to be enough. The shudder in the cable, the vibration in the shaft walls, the cage still moving fast as it passes through the 96th floor fire transit. And then the resistance holds, the deceleration continues, and the cage hits the bottom level with a heavy thud that is loud and impactful and survivable. That's the whole sequence. 4 minutes of screen time, maybe less. No explosions, no CGI set pieces, just a man in a mechanical room with a lever and a very specific deadline. It's one of the most effective scenes in the film, not despite its simplicity, because of it. Dwayne Johnson carries something into this role that his star persona doesn't always get credit for, the ability to play a man who is doing the maximum his body allows and finding that maximum genuinely difficult. The Rock character, the cultural construct that his career has built around him, operates in a register of effortless physical dominance. You watch him in franchise films and the underlying message of most sequences is that his body is the answer to every problem. Skyscraper is, on some level, a deliberate complication of that message. Will Sawyer is not effortlessly dominant, he wins because he won't stop trying, which is a different thing entirely, and the distinction between those two modes is what gives the film whatever emotional depth it earns. The crater moment for that distinction is the shaft descent. It's the scene where Will is doing something that his body, specifically his prosthetic leg, specifically his size, specifically the accumulated damage of the previous 90 minutes, is genuinely not built for, and he does it anyway, not triumphantly, mechanically. One careful movement at a time in the dark. That's not The Rock. That's a character. And for a studio action film built around the most commercially reliable star on the planet, the decision to lean into that vulnerability rather than paper over it says something about what the filmmakers actually wanted to make. Let's spend more time on the duct tape exterior climb than the movie does, because the movie rushes it slightly in service of getting Will into Zhao's penthouse, and there's more to say. The window track system Will uses as a ladder, the structural rail that the Pearl's automated window cleaning equipment runs along, is rated for the weight of industrial cleaning apparatus, which is significant. Will isn't hanging from glass or from the building's decorative exterior panels. He's on actual load-bearing infrastructure. That distinction matters because it's the detail that tips the sequence from pure fantasy into the territory of absurd but mechanically grounded. The track can hold him. The duct tape can maintain friction against the steel rail. The question of whether a human being can traverse 2 floors of exterior building face at 2,000 feet elevation in harbor wind is not really a question of physics, it's a question of nerve. Will's nerve is not in question at this point in the film. What's interesting, and what the film handles without underlining it, is that the exterior sequence is the one moment where Will is completely alone with no immediate threat. Basha doesn't know he's outside the building. Wu's drones aren't covering the south face at this altitude. The news helicopters are below him. For about 3 minutes, the only pressure on Will Sawyer is the wind and the height and the prosthetic leg and gravity. No enemy. No clock beyond the biometric countdown Zhao mentioned. Just the exterior of the world's tallest building and the manual problem of getting up 2 floors of it. There's something almost meditative in how Johnson plays it. The rhythm of the movement, commit the hand, commit the foot, transfer weight, repeat, has a steadiness to it that reads less like urgency and more like the full absorption of a person who has learned to put everything except the next move somewhere else entirely. He's not thinking about Georgia. He's not thinking about Ben. He's thinking about the next placement. That's a learned skill. Not innate toughness, something you develop in a career that requires you to make good decisions in bad situations over and over until the noise stops and only the problem remains. The harbor view from the south face of the Pearl at floor 218 at midnight during an active fire in the building you're hanging from is probably not something Will Sawyer has the bandwidth to appreciate in real time, but the camera does. One shot, brief, maybe 4 seconds, pulls wide and shows Will against the full scale of the Pearl's exterior, the harbor and the city visible in the distance behind him, the amber glow of the fire visible in the windows below him, the dark glass of the penthouse above. The shot doesn't editorialize. No swelling music, no slow motion, just the scale of the thing, presented plainly. It's the movie's most honest visual statement of what it's asking you to accept. Not hiding the absurdity, pointing at it. A man with a prosthetic leg and a roll of tape scaling the exterior of the world's tallest building at night over Hong Kong harbor. And somehow, because of the 2 hours of character work and physical consequence that preceded it, you're completely with him. That's the trick the film pulls. Not special effects, not the stunt work, though the stunt work is genuinely impressive. The reason the exterior climb works is that Will Sawyer has been built, across the preceding 70 minutes, into someone specific enough that you stopped watching a movie star and started watching a particular man with particular reasons. When a specific person does an impossible thing for specific reasons you understand and believe in, that's when spectacle becomes something more than spectacle. Zhao's reaction to finding Will outside his window deserves a moment. He's been alone in the penthouse for almost 4 hours. He's watched his building burn from behind blast-proof glass. He's run through every possible exit scenario available to him and found them all closed. He's a man accustomed to solving problems with resources and leverage and infrastructure, and all of his resources and leverage and infrastructure are currently either on fire or in Botha's control, and then someone knocks on his window from the outside. At floor 220. The pause before Zhao opens the window is one of the film's small pleasures. The expression of a man whose extremely bad night has just produced a development he genuinely didn't model for. He opens the window. Will climbs through. And Zhao's first response is not relief or gratitude, but the genuinely reasonable question of how, specifically, this happened. Tape, Will says, and Zhao looks at the duct tape on Will's hands with the expression of someone who built a 225-floor technological marvel and is learning in real time that the thing that saved him was construction supply store inventory. It's one line, one look, 20 seconds of screen time. It's the funniest moment in the film, and it lands because it's true. Not a joke written into the script, but the natural comedic byproduct of an absurd situation played completely straight by both people in it. The comparison to Die Hard is worth addressing directly, because it follows this film everywhere, and it's not entirely fair to either movie. Die Hard is a masterpiece of the form. Full stop. It invented a template so effective that Hollywood spent 30 years trying to reproduce it, sometimes brilliantly. Speed, the first mission, impossible, more often not. The template is specific. Take an ordinary man, put him in an extraordinary situation, make his ordinariness the source of both his vulnerability and his ultimate competence. John McClane wins because he's a regular cop who happens to be very hard to kill, not because he's superhuman. Skyscraper is not trying to make that film. Will Sawyer is not ordinary. He's a former FBI hostage rescue team leader, elite federal law enforcement, the kind of training that puts you in the top fraction of a percent of people in terms of crisis response capability. The film doesn't pretend otherwise. It doesn't do the die-hard thing of having Will be surprised by his own competence. He's not surprised. He knows what he can do. The question the film is actually asking is different. What does it cost a man who has already given everything once to give everything again? The prologue answers that question by establishing the cost. Will didn't just lose a leg in that suburban explosion. He lost a version of himself, the operational certainty, the identity built around a specific function, the team that was the context in which he knew who he was. He rebuilt something from that, with Sarah, with his kids, in a quieter life in a different mode. And then the Pearl put him back inside a crisis environment with none of his infrastructure and all of his training, and demanded to know whether the rebuilt version is as real as the original. The movie's answer, more so, because it's chosen rather than given. The Sarah Sawyer question is worth a full paragraph, because the film keeps getting reviewed as if Neve Campbell is decorative. She isn't. Sarah Sawyer is the film's second protagonist, and the architecture of the plot reflects that even if the marketing didn't. Remove Sarah from Skyscraper and the movie ends with the Pearl still burning. Botha's fire suppression lockdown runs indefinitely. The building burns to its structure. Will and Georgia and Zhao are extracted from the roof into a city that's watching the world's most expensive building become a total loss. It's Sarah who gets the tablet. It's Sarah who reboots the systems. It's Sarah who reverses the ventilation and reactivates the suppression and gives the Pearl a building to go back to. The fight with Shah is the scene the film uses to establish that Sarah's contribution is not passive. She doesn't get the tablet because Wu's team happened to be nearby. She gets it because she was watching the perimeter, identified Shah's exit vector, put herself in the path of a woman who outclasses her technically, and refused to let go of the device when the fight went against her. That's an active choice under physical duress, not a plot convenience. Neve Campbell plays Sarah with a specific kind of competence that doesn't perform itself. She's not the action hero wife who suddenly reveals a secret martial arts background. She's a trauma surgeon and a former naval officer and a mother, and all three of those things are visible in every decision she makes during the film's second half. She reads situations and responds to them efficiently. She communicates critical information to Wu in the minimum time required to change his operational picture. She doesn't panic. That's not a supporting role. That's a co-lead, written as a co-lead who got marketed as a supporting role. The film is smarter than its promotional materials. One more thing about the Pearl as a setting. Because buildings in action films are usually just environments, interchangeable containers for sequences that could happen anywhere. The Pearl is a character. Zhao built it to be extraordinary, and the film respects that aspiration even while destroying it. The design details, the mirror room at the top, the vertical gardens and the residential floors, the redundant safety architecture, the environment control systems that we'll use as weapons and tools throughout the film. These aren't set dressing. They're the building's personality expressing itself through the crisis. The Pearl fights back against what's being done to it, through Will, through Sarah, through Zhao himself, because they all understand it as something worth saving. The final image of the Pearl, smoke clearing, fire suppression foam visible in the upper windows, the structure intact and the harbor reflecting its lights back up from below. lands with genuine weight because the film spent its runtime making you care about a building. That's not easy. Most films can't make you care about the human beings in them. This one made you care about the architectural vision of a fictitious Hong Kong billionaire. Zhao's line, "I'll rebuild it better," is the film's thesis statement delivered in 4 words. Not defiance exactly, something more durable than defiance. The acknowledgement that the thing worth building is still worth building even after you've watched it nearly destroyed. That what you can protect and what you can rebuild are both forms of the same belief about what's possible. Will Sawyer climbed a burning building for his family. Zhao Longji will rebuild a burning building for everyone else. Both of those are, in their own register, the same kind of love. That's what Skyscraper is about. Underneath the crane jump and the duct tape and the mirror room and the grenade, the particular human stubbornness of refusing to let the things you've built, family, legacy, self, stay destroyed. It's not a perfect film, but it's a more honest one than it gets credit for.